dessert table looks really good, and I regret that I didn't get a chance to eat it maybe later. Hello, I'm Dakota. Thanks so much for letting me be with you on what I know has been a really wonderful summit. It's a real delight to be here, to follow the great success of the collaborative and just to be with you all. You know, at a lot of places I go to, conversations typically start like this. This is a cartoon that was in the Albuquerque Journal in 2013, back when the idea of collective impact was starting to take hold. And what we found, and you know, I know that y'all down here in the Commonwealth never have this problem, but you know, it's like, yeah, gosh, you know, students aren't really coming to us very much ready. If they only left kindergarten being able to count to 100 in reading, and in 3rd grade reading, and 8th grade math, high school soft skill readiness, and then colleges get them, and then the employers saying, you're not training them well enough for colleges, and we just do this blame game. And even if we were to change the shirts on these wonderful folks, and think about what it looks like for adult students, we say, gosh, students don't have enough housing, or housing providers aren't doing enough, the SNAP folks aren't doing enough, so on and so forth. We're constantly in this blame game. And the thing is that the first step is that, you know, our students, our residents, our neighbors, our employees, the folks that we care most about, can't really afford for us to be in the blame game. You all know all this data, and I'm not going to throw a lot of data at you today, but you know, the Alice report coming out of United Way really shows 42% of people in the United States have the hardest time just meeting basic household needs. And I know this number is quite different nowadays as well. There's some really wonderful Alice data down at the county level. And even when we start looking at individual students that are currently enrolled in school, nearly 2/3 of students today are working while in college, 40% of which work full-time jobs while trying to also go to school. Half of students today are financially independent from their parents or from other folks. As was noted earlier, you know, many more students are facing housing insecurity, food insecurity. Over 1/3 of students report not knowing where the next meal comes from. 1 out of every 10 doesn't really have a very stable housing. And even when a student happens to succeed, get that bachelor's degree, they often leave with massive debt. The average student loan debt being around $30,000. And of course, if you're a learner of color, that amount just goes up and up. Again, they can't really afford for us to be blaming. But here's the good news about this cartoon. The cartoon, if people were just to take their fingers and point it in the center of the table, they'd be onto something. Because the problem that people are trying to solve, when we talk about post-secondary attainment, when we talk about poverty, when we talk about the things that we have to resolve, we know that no one organization can do it alone. If you could, you would by now. No one sector can even do it alone. The problem lives at the intersection of all these organizations. And the good news is that the problem lives there, so too do the solutions. We need an ecosystem approach of folks that are managing, solving, dissolving these problems together, working in collaboration to actually tackle some of our most complex social challenges that you all are facing. Now, luckily, you're not alone in doing this. I have the real privilege of serving a large network of folks in our national talent network, about 100 or so cross-sector partnerships, large, small, urban, rural. Some are focused on traditional age students, others are just focused on, you know, workforce pathways. Every one of these is very different. The best among them earn the Talent Hub designation. It's like a LEED certification on a building, but for partnerships. And we mark these places as having exemplary systems in place and exemplary levels of collaboration. We've assessed over 140 communities in the country, partnerships in the community, only 25 have earned this designation. So it's fairly difficult. And the Talent Hub idea really came from my former CEO, Jamie Mirasotis, in his book, America Needs Talent. And in it, he talks about talent hubs. And he describes them this way. Talent hubs set goals. You know, they listen to what employers need, foster the sense of place, offering multiple pathways to success for different types of people. But I think the latter part of this quote is more important. You know, they work together harmoniously, driven by the idea that this place, our home, can be restored with people at the core to ensure that it's even better than it was before. And so while every single one of these places is different, I always joke with folks, you know, like everyone is a snowflake. I believe that. But we're all snow, and we can learn a lot from each other. And so while every one of these communities, every one of these colleges, every one of these higher institutions is a little bit different, they all kind of have the same starting place. They ask themselves, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And if you start your conversation by asking that question, again, you're on the right track. You're getting a good leg, moving away from that point of blame game. And it turns out, when you start to think about it in this way, you can actually have an impact. And again, I'm not going to throw a lot of data at you today, but just to really drive home the point, because there are people who are like, collaboration, that's cute. I really just want to do my thing. I'll just go along with my favorite solution. And so, let me just show you that when it comes to actually producing and improving credential attainment, we examined talent hubs over a 3-year period and compared them to the national rate of credential completion. And just looking cumulatively, at the time, the nation was growing over that 3-year period, graduating a 1.8% increase. Talent hubs had over 12% increase in credential output. And even when we looked at just adults, some adults that had no prior post-secondary experience and adults that had some college credit but had yet to earn their first credential. During this 3-year period prior to the pandemic, the nation was contracting, actually graduating fewer students during that time. Talent hubs were outproducing. So what makes these partnerships work? And today what I want to do is I want to share 4 insights with you. If you leave nothing, I hope you grab onto one of these and say, yes, this is the part I'm going by. If you do all 4, wonderful. But there's 4 kind of pieces that I want to really share with you. The first one is what we'll call the paradigm shift. In almost all of these places, they've come to accept that it's a systems thing, not a single thing. And now this is the part, there's a conversation, I guess, going on over here about tattoos during lunch. And so this is always my challenge. I don't have any tattoos. I honestly don't know if I'm brave enough. It kind of sounds scary. But I'm always going to say, I'm going to be successful today if someone in the room is like, yeah, man, I'm with you, and I'm going to get this tattoo. Because if I get a tattoo, it's going to probably be this. So, if anyone's feeling so inspired, I'm sure there's a decent shop somewhere in Bowling Green. I got some time. Okay, so that's my test. That's my test. If you'll get this tattoo with me. Right? Alright. One of these days we'll get it. Moving on. In order to really share this idea of it's a systems thing, not a single thing, I want to tell you a story. And I want to tell you about the community that CivicLab comes from, Columbus, Indiana. It's not too far from here. Columbus, Indiana is a community of about 50,000 people, 40 minutes south of Indianapolis, right perfectly between the triangle of Louisville, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. And if you haven't heard of Columbus, Indiana before, you're a lot like me. I came from Chicago. I'd never heard of this place. When you say Columbus, I think Ohio, but it's actually Indiana. But Columbus, Indiana is a place that we should know and we should be learning from. It turns out for the last 2 decades, Columbus, Indiana, the place that many of us have never heard before, has been leading the country in terms of young adult college attainment, with one of the largest increases out of any other metropolitan area in the United States. And even when they said, okay, that's great for the traditional institutions, but we need to focus on our adults, and they looked at the 4 key industries, and figured out the math about what it's going to take to make sure those industries and those high-demand jobs are actually getting filled. They figured out exactly how many people they needed, and looked at their 2 populations, adults with some college credit but no credential, and adults that never had post-secondary experience before. In year 1 of reorganizing themselves around this particular group of people, they hit 96% of their talent goal, and every year after that, become a net out producer of talent. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be like, Dakota, our friends in the north here, you sound awfully white. And you'd be right, Indiana is a very white place. But it turns out Columbus, Indiana is one of the fastest growing and diversifying communities in the country. Wall Street Journal made a great report looking at the last census data and said, where is diversity happening the most? And they measured and talked about the National Diversity Index, which measures the likelihood that you or I will bump into somebody in our own community of a different racial or ethnic background than ours. During this last decade, the national index rose by 23%. Columbus, Indiana grew by 67%, faster than any other community in terms of diversification. And our colleagues at Heartland, Florida, also were looking at past census data and said, okay, what can we really learn from metropolitan areas that are shaping the way of talent? And if you're not catching on to the theme quite yet, boom, Columbus, Indiana, right there up our top. Little place that we never heard of before, leading the country in terms of college grads after the last decade, not only with small and medium metros, but with every other metropolitan area. More than New York, Chicago, LA, Columbus, Indiana, leading the way. So if you're like me, if you're an inquisitive person, you all smart people in this room, you're kind of like, I've never heard of this place. Why the heck is this happening? How have we not heard about it? Well, in order to tell you that part of the story, I have to bring it back a bit. Because Columbus, Indiana is highly unique. It is a 75-year living laboratory for cross-sector collaboration. And I'm going to bring it back 75 years to this man. This is a young J. Irwin Miller. J. Irwin Miller was the son of the Miller family who lived in Columbus. And the Millers were financiers. They invested in a lot of local companies and into wholesales, but a lot of their stuff was in bank business. And J. Irwin did the unthinkable. He goes to Yale and he studied humanities. He studied languages so he could read the Bible in the original language and text. He studied music and architecture. You know, he did all these things. And so he graduates and he moves out to California for a little while. And then finally the family says, hey, J. Irwin, you need to come back home. And they had no idea what they're going to do with it. Like, what do you possibly do with this humanities major? And this is, by the way, I'm a former tuba player. I studied music in college, so this is what and they said, okay. But at the time, it just so happened that in the Miller family's garage, their driver had been tinkering with a brand new technology called the diesel engine. And they were trying to figure out, hey, can we monetize and turn the diesel engine into some kind of company? For 18 years, this company did not turn a profit. Not a dime. Talk about some patient capital. And so they said, hey, J. Irwin, come back. We want you to be the chairman of this company. You know, answer some mail, do this, that, kind of thing. You know what chairmen do. And if you end up turning a profit for this company, great. If not, no big deal. We'll get you some learning so you can forget all that humanities stuff. And then we'll just script the company from parts. Well, very long story short, that company will become Cummins Engines. One of the world's leading manufacturers of engines, particularly large engines. 75,000 employees around the country doing billions of dollars business every year. Still headquartered in Columbus, Indiana. And it was all, a lot of it is responsible for J. Irwin Miller and his visionary leadership and that blend of humanities as well as business. And one of the first things he realized is that he confronted a problem that many of our communities actually face. You're looking at this birth rates, and what is this lovely little area? The baby boom. I heard it in a word somewhere. Yes, the baby boom. The baby boom was quite a profound impact on all of our communities. And if you haven't dug into it, and wherever your hometown is, I encourage you to look at your community's history, pre and post baby boom. It will reveal fascinating things. In Columbus, they did the math. They had really bad schools in Columbus at the time. And they said, you know what? We're going to have to build a brand new school every 2 years for the next 18 years just to have enough seats for the kids that we're producing. And so J. Irwin Miller said, okay, I know that I want my community to be a great place. I know that in order for me to attract the world-class talent that I want to build my company, that people will want places where their kids are going to go to school and have a good school system. And I want to prepare the next generation of leaders. So how do I do that? Being a fan of architecture, J. Irwin Miller goes to the community and he makes what we affectionately refer to now as the offer. And he says, I've listed on this piece of paper the 5 world's best architects of the time. We now know them as mid-century moderns, but obviously they're just masters of it. And he said, hey, I want you, the community, to do something. I want you to work together to interview these 5 architects. Choose the one you want to work with. And then work with that architect to design the school that you want to build. And if you do this, I will pay for the architect's fees, their travel fees. You pay for the construction costs, and all that. And so he said, sure, whatever, man. You know, free money on the table. We're going to build a school, let's try it. And so within that first year, here you are, the Lindsay Schmidt Elementary School built by Harry Reese. Now, if there's any architecture fans in the room, I apologize. I'm going to blow through a lot of really great architecture stuff. Come on up to Columbus and have a great tour. Moving on. So here's the problem with children. Which I think there's a lot of problems with. As someone who's intentionally following this person. One of the problems with kids is that they grow up. And like we said, they have to build a new school every other year. And the community said, gosh, this works really well. And so, literally, while this was going on, hey, Mr. Miller, would you do that thing again? Absolutely. That was his goal. His goal wasn't just to build a school, but it was to get the community working together in a new way to tackle a complex challenge. And so they built another school. And another school. And another school. This one's really interesting because they built a curriculum of the schools prior to the building. So being a big engineering design firm, they knew that they needed people working in projects and teams. And so each of these 4 pieces jutting out is actually a pod of classrooms where students would actually stay and work and teams. The curriculum was built first. The latest school we built was our brand new Ivy Tech Community College on our campus. Opened up in 2022, now known as More Like All. The program didn't just stop, though, at schools. It said any publicly funded building in our community is eligible for this program. And so here you see the IMP library. IMP being the same architect who built the pyramids outside of the Louvre. Yeah, pretty fancy guy. This is Columbus City Hall, giant cantilever arms, outstretching, embracing the community. An Art Deco fire station. The religious community got involved, even though they're not eligible for the program, but suddenly Columbus says, this is how we work. This is what we do here. It is now the Columbus way. And so the churches got involved, hiring the same architects to come out and build places of faith and worship throughout the community. The private sector could not be left out. So here you see the Urban Bank. That's one of the first banks in the country that actually got rid of those old banker bars, because they knew they wanted people from the fields and from manufacturing to feel welcome when they came inside and that there wasn't a barrier here. This is the old newspaper building, Republic, entirely wrapped in glass to reflect the transparency of the press. And at night you could see the press machines running and printing the next day's newspaper. This is now home to Indiana University's School of Architecture and Design, which was a whole other fight that we'll talk about today. This even moved into graphic design. Paul Rand created some of Columbus's most iconic graphic designs. You have the Tipton Lakes logo, our dancing seas, which can be found all over. And you know, if you're like me and don't keep up on the who's who of graphic design, Paul Rand is the same person who created such logos as UPS, ABC, IBM, Westinghouse. I mean, folks, this is their jail. When I first visited Columbus, I kid you not, I'm driving through. I passed this place. I was like, oh, that looks like a swanky hotel. This little town up there must be this little cool moment. I don't know, maybe they got a bird problem. I don't know what their deal is. No, this is their jail. This is their jail. And so if you're listening to me and you're saying, yeah, Dakota, I'm with you, I get it. Find a wealthy benefactor, build a lot of buildings. Cool, that is one lesson, but that was never really the point. Mr. Miller always loved this Churchill quote, that first we design our buildings and then they design us. First we create our spaces, then that space makes no sense. His goal was always to get the community working together to solve a challenge that no one thing could do alone. And there are three core beliefs, I think, that really undergird not only what Columbus did over the course of 75 years, but now what many of our communities really espouse in modern. The first one was this idea that there's nothing more expensive than mediocrity. As an engine manufacturer, common sense knows this. If I build you a shoddy engine, I'm going to be paying for it time and time again. But again, he's not talking about engines, he's talking about people, he's talking about social systems. If we have average social systems, average education systems, average social support systems, we're going to be paying for it time and time again. Aren't we already? Nothing is more expensive than mediocrity. The second core belief is that mastering the ability to work for and with others is the cement of our society. Again, he knew this from the manufacturing context. If I'm on an assembly line, I know that mastering my ability to work for and with the person who's behind me and in front of me in this line is really critical. But again, he's not talking about manufacturing. He's talking about our communities. He's talking about democracy. He's talking about we have to really think about what it means to work for and with one another in order to really achieve our goal. But this last one, I think, is the real one. This last one is the one that is like the charge for CivicLab, and I think the charge of a lot of places. He was addressing a group of people, business leaders, in New York in 1970. And he was being asked to reflect on kind of America's manufacturing prowess post-World Wars. And he says, the American systems, both public and private, were built for a world which no longer exists, which, by the way, Marvin from today's panel says. They were built for a world which no longer exists, and yet it is our normal preference to rehabilitate the damaged products of our systems rather than reform the systems ourselves. In our world, the products of our systems are clear. And so, what we're constantly doing, one of my great colleagues, Dr. Sarah Lundquist, is a retired vice provost from San Ana College out in California. And every time she sees this quote, she thinks about how many times she did this at Santa Ana. And she says, you know, Dakota, what we're constantly doing is attaching bubble wrap, Band-Aids, and all these things on the students to push them through a system that we are unwilling to change. And we also heard that a little bit. I thought Raina from this morning really nailed this point. And in fact, I added a slide because I think it's really indicative. Sarah goes on to say, what we also do in higher ed in particular is that we start to celebrate those exceptional few that had the ability, the resources, whatever it might be, the gumption, to survive a system that we're going to change. And I was one of those few. This is actually a story that my alma mater published about. Desperate but not defeated. Here's a kid who grew up homeless, who made it here anyway, and because of your financial support, he got through college. Now, don't get me wrong. I have worked out both sides of philanthropy. I know that we have to do this, because this is how you raise money from the people who aren't involved in our system. This is a compelling story, and I was very happy to lend myself. I do not blame my alma mater for doing this one bit. But what bugs me is that if I go through the alumni magazine, these are all the stories. And what we're telling students all the time is that, hey, we're not going to fix anything, but you just need to be strong enough. You need to be strong enough to get through our system, because we are unwilling to change the system itself and more focused on rehabilitation. And it's not just in education, by the way. I would do the same speech in front of the medical profession, the tech profession, you name it. It is an American way of rehabilitating. So we have to have a paradigm shift. The first step, the places that are doing this well make this paradigm shift and they acknowledge it is a systems thing, not a single thing. And maybe you're with me, maybe you're almost ready to get this tattooed, so let me go one step further. Because in higher ed, we get real scared by the word system, right? You hear system, we're like, someone's going over our money. Like, there's going to be some kind of accountability structure that I don't want. But that's not the system I'm talking about, right? The system we're talking about, this kind of idea of systems in the CivicLab, really you have to start by saying, well, what is the essential purpose of this given system? And so if we're using a quick example, here's one from Columbus. How might we work together to ensure that the right people get the right support to achieve the right kind of ends? And what we start to do is say, go around and what are the parts of that system? We go around to different organizations, people, stakeholders, and say, who is doing what for whom? Oh, I provide tutoring services, I provide career connections, I am a financial aid provider. And from there, we start to understand the system by identifying its parts. Now here's the tricky thing, right? The parts of the system only get their identity and purpose in relation to another piece. You wouldn't need my scholarship program if these other parts of the system were completed. The other way I like to think about this is imagine for a moment you're a benevolent alien, and for some reason you visited Earth. I think you might have took the wrong turn, but hey, we're here, it's been worth it. You wind up in your local, hardware store, and you come across a box of doorknobs. You don't know what a doorknob is. And what does it look like? The doorknob in a box is nothing, just a hunk of metal. The doorknob only gets its purpose. The doorknob only gets its identity once it's attached to the door. The door to the room for the building, so on and so forth. That's why when you're watching like dystopian TV, almost always you're going to see doors off hinges. It is a visual reference for us, and I'm like, oh, the system's broken down. Check it out. Check it out. It's interesting. So we have to understand that each of these individual parts of the system really only get their identity and purpose into relation to one another. And if we start to accept this, it moves us away from this resource deficit-based thinking. So much of our world is based on how much I get, how much you get, and if we just divide the pie in the right way, everything will work just fine. That ends up being very resource deficit-minded. And the problem with focusing on the resources is that they drain. Resources are finite, they're limited. We end up with this closed system. Instead, if we're focusing on the relationship, that's to say, if we focus more on how the parts of our system, how your organization, your program, your department, your course, whatever it is in that system, and we focus instead on how it fits into the grander scheme of things, we're now focusing more on the relationship side of things, which is about assets and which is about abundance and cooperation. And they tend to get stronger over time. I got asked as we're going into the pandemic, people loved to ask me, like, hey, how many of these partnerships do you think are going to fold? Now that all these resources and money are going to be diverted to emergency response, I bet your acute collaborators are going to go away. The opposite was true. Why? Because you all called each other. You all had to rely on each other when those resources were gone. And which relationships got stronger for you? The ones that were already pretty strong in the first place. Some of you might have created some. The pandemic was a perfect lesson of how resource thinking can be a real trap moving more towards relationship. In other words, the system itself is the set of relationships. It's the way that we work together. And so if you want to talk about systems change, and there's a lot of different elements of system change, sure. Transforming a system is fundamentally about transforming those relationships, period. More than policy and more than practice. Right? Policy and practice and money are actually outputs of the system. They're outputs of what we have done together, and what we have decided right, and what we decided to do together. If you want to change your system, you change the way these parts fit together. Ultimately, it results in the key paradigm shift, moving away from programmatic thinking. This is my last bit of this, and then I'll move on to what's number 2. Oftentimes what we do is we're mostly in the programmatic model of thinking. Someone comes to us, we identify a problem, or we see a problem in the data. Not enough students are graduating, getting too many high DFW rates, whatever your issue is. And so what do? Well, we have to solve that problem, because we are all problem solvers, right? And so we go into our organization, we say who can do what, and we allocate resources and we plan, and what do we wind up with? A new program. How many of you have way too many programs? Yeah, liars. I know so many more, right? I mean, one of my most popular presentations is around initiative fatigue, because everyone is just so fatigued by all the initiatives we have. Why? Because we're using programmatic thinking. We see a problem, we have to create a new thing. When I was working for Illinois State University, we looked at our Chicago Public School students and we realized, hey, they're not graduating the same way. So what do? We created a new summer break program exclusively for Chicago Public School students. It's the same kind of idea, a little bit of tweaks. We did a little study on it. It turns out students who were in our program did worse than students who were in the normal summer break program. Whoops. I don't think it caused harm, but they weren't doing any better. We had to think about it in the systemic way. Where we said, how might we instead dissolve the problem by changing the underlying conditions so that problem never comes up again? And so what we did is we just looked at the normal way that we do some bridge and said, how might we just tweak a couple things here and there, add a component or two, and just modify how the current system is working to have a disproportionate positive impact on the students. And that's what we did. It kind of worked. But it's good practice. Once we go into this way of actually focusing on dissolving a problem, not thinking about resources, and instead using processes and systems in collaboration, what you wind up with is actually a fundamental redesign of the work rather than yet another program. And so my closing point on this, before I move on, is that if you find yourself in a conversation where you need to create a new program, stop and just take a breath and ask folks, hey, is there actually a way that we can just redesign what's already happening to achieve the same goal? And everyone will be delighted, because now you've saved yourself 1,000 meetings. Okay? Item number 2, key insight number 2, which is the question. Going on this kind of problem-solving thing, one of the reasons that we get tripped up, let's say you're in that meeting, is that we don't really understand what type of problem we're trying to solve. We're very good at knowing what the problems are, but when it comes to the type of the issues, we get a little squirrely on things. I love to use the Connect framework. I'm going to go into this very, very quickly. Connect framework built by Dave Snowden, not Edward Snowden, the guy. Dave Snowden is a Welsh man who was in his 70s, a leading complexity thinker, knowledge management science responsible for IBM creating computers. It's wild. If you do nothing else, go check out Dave Snowden's work. It's amazing. And he built this framework as a way to help leaders understand what type of problem they're trying to face. A lot of times we have simple problems, where the cause and effect relationship is clearly observable by everyone in the room. It requires no special knowledge. Cause and effect, there's the problem, here's what happens. And in order to respond to that, what we do is we just say, okay, there's a problem, we categorize what kind of problem it is, and we employ behavior, skills, and interventions, right? For me, AI chatbots are great with simple things. You know? I hate American Airlines, because I travel all the time, and I've just been burned one too many times with American Airlines, so I'm done. But of course, the other day I had to call their customer support. And you fight with them all the time. Why? Because they're just trying to simplify. But I don't have that kind of problem. I require something a little bit more. And so they hook me up to a complicated problem. Complicated problem, again, cause and effect can be known and observable only by a few specialists. And this is when we have to get multiple people together to say, okay, how do we help solve this problem? We analyze what's going on, and then we respond to it. So this is akin to our advising center. Sometimes we have to combine financial and student success advising, academic advising, teams of people coming around to solve a particular problem. Because the scaled intervention didn't quite work. But most of the problems that we're talking about in this room are actually complex problems. Complex problems, the cause and effect relationship is unknowable. You don't really get a chance to see the cause and effect relationship until it's too late, until it's already happened. And even still, we can usually only sense what's going on. It's not going to show up in a lot of data. And so from here, we have to probe, try multiple things to see how the system itself on a problem actually moves, sense what's happening, and then create an action. So let me give you an example of this. Boom, congratulations, you're in. You know, for me, I was like living with I was a senior in high school, I was living with a friend at the time, being homeless, whatever else. And I was so pumped because I applied to one college, I applied to one scholarship, I got both. So imagine my excitement when a nice big red envelope like this one shows up in my door and I'm pumped. And I rip it open, and the first thing I see is, oh good, really smart people at my university gave this handy-dandy checklist, and I can do a checklist like that. Because if you've navigated a lot of social programs, you know how to navigate a checklist. So I'm like, cool, I just do these 7 things. I'm going to be at first day of class all the time. This is a real example. This is a college that I will remain nameless, that we're currently working with. They hired EAB to come in and do a secret shop of what it takes to get from you've been accepted to your first day of class. Okay? What happened to our neat little checklist? Come on. It was supposed to be in there. I mean, this you can spend days on this. Trust me, I mean, there's like a loop down here at registration. There's one at the testing center. You know, you come in to orientation. Oh, you stopped financial aid a couple times. Go back. You know, I mean, it's wild. It's wild. So we had to ask the question with this college. The first question I asked is, what problem are you trying to solve? Because they've been trying to tackle this for a while. And again, what they're doing is they're moving into the programmatic mindset of thinking. They're saying, oh, we're having a complicated problem. If we just get experts the right way, then we'll fix it. And the problem with that approach is that all you're going to do is tweak what happens at the advising center. We jump down to the parts rather than the system. And we say, you know what will make this whole thing easier if the advisor centers would just work more. And, you know, I don't know. Just go figure it out. Put in longer hours, then you can have more people. Right? Or maybe there's going to be that new Google Drive or a website. Yeah, we need a website. Right? And we're always focusing on the parts. Always on the parts. And instead, I think if we look at the Connected framework, and this is what this is, we said, oh gosh, we can't, this is not a simple problem, nor is it a complicated problem. This is a complex problem. Intermingled problems all over the place. And what we have to do is improve the fit of those parts. If I were to go back, right, all of these are parts of that system. That little example I showed on tutoring, this is a real-life example of a subsystem. The system of getting someone from accepted to the first day of class. This is a system that has multiple parts. So one of the probes that they're doing is they're saying, what if we took all of these over here, all this parking and payment things, and we moved it into a resource allocation center, which is a terrible name, but whatever. He said, yes, right? They're going to try that. They're going to try tweaking so advising is the first thing you can do, and then we're going to sever these other connections. They're trying these other probes to redesign the system without asking any one part to do anything different. The advising center doesn't have to do anything different. Let's just move where you're at in the process. Same thing about the post. Yeah, sure, we might say, hey, instead of offering it this day, why don't you come over here? You know, there's some tweaks you can do. But they realized, again, that they were dealing with a complex problem and that they couldn't just simple their way out of it. They couldn't find a scales intervention. A chatbot will not save them. Right? They had to reorganize those pieces. Let me give you another example. It has to do with external partnerships. I'm going to bring it down to Nashville. In Nashville, they were really focused on adults, in particular certain adults in a federally designated promise zone. And they said, okay, we really want to learn about what is keeping you from re-enrolling in higher education. And they produced this handy-dandy little report. And in this report, of course, like we all do, we submitted this survey. And they looked at the survey data and said, okay, tuition, we can't really do anything about, but let's focus on this child and family. There's a lot of people that said child and family is a barrier. Now, Dr. Shauna Jackson, a really wonderful community college leader at Nashville State Community College, says, gosh, you know what? Done, I'm ready. I will build a brand new child care center. Let's go. And she's pumped. But everyone's like, hey, why don't you pump the brakes for a second? Let's just do the unthinkable. Let's go talk to people. We've done this survey. Well, what does child family really mean? Again, there's a lot of problems with kids. So I probably clicked that box for a lot of reasons. And so they did. And they realized that they started talking to residents in the neighborhood. They found two key themes. One was that they heard very clearly that the focus on kids leaves little time to think about college. In other words, even if you did provide me child care while I was in class, that's not enough. I need mental space to study, to be myself, to relax. Like, you're going to need to do more than just give me child care while I'm in class. Okay, so now we're talking about time. A little bit different than access. But the second one is actually the one they heard the most from. They went in and they said, you know what, my idea of being a good parent is being there for my kid to get off the school bus. I want to help my kid with their homework. I want to be there for my child, and I don't like the idea of my kid going off to school at some other place with a bunch of people I don't know in some after-school program. And so it really shifted the conversation. It wasn't about childcare, it was about time. It was about transportation. Because, of course, the community college is only 15 minutes away from this neighborhood if you own a car. If you own a bus, it's an hour and 15 minutes plus a bus transfer. So now my Tuesday, Thursday, 3-hour night classes are now 6-hour night classes on Tuesday and Thursday. Right? So they got their stakeholders together, the mayor's there, all these folks, and they said, okay, what might we do? And they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to tweak this bus line, move it over here. We're going to co-locate and relocate underutilized programs from Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCAs. We're going to hire people from that community to run those programs in that particular community. So now when you get off the school bus, it's an auntie, it's an uncle, it's a neighbor who I know who's going to be there to greet my kid on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm also going to give you schedule predictability. So this way every semester your classes don't change and you have to negotiate with an employer. All your classes are only on Tuesdays and Thursdays forever until you finish your degree. Predictability and time is what they had to solve for. It wasn't about building new child care centers. They were dealing with a complex issue, not a simple one. Complex issue requires different approaches. I'm going to go through this quick, but there's a wonderful tool that we have called the Manage, Solve, Resolve tool. When we're in the managed domain, this is where simple problems live. It's about providing the most things to the most people to do the most amount of good. We're primarily using resources. And these are perfect for scaled, repetitive interventions. We're managing problems. We move over to the solve domain. That's again where someone comes up and says, gosh, I have this unique challenge. And what we're focused on is doing the right things for the right people to achieve the right outcome. Again, we're leveraging human skills here and teams to say, you need this one thing, we have to solve your problem today. Finally, there's the dissolving category. Well, what we're focusing on is saying, hey, we need to change the underlying conditions that hold this problem in the first place together. How might we reorganize the fit of all the parts of our system to get rid of that problem? The issue with problem solving is that we solve it over and over and over and over and over again. And if you don't believe me, one of my favorite things to do when I'm on a college campus is to go to their counselors and advisors and say, what are the top 5 things that you find yourself solving day in and day out? For those of you on leadership teams, there's your agenda. Those are problems that are ripe for dissolution. And so oftentimes what I like to do, and this is the lead behind that you can ask yourself, is that if you had 100% of your resources, your campus, your unit, your department, whatever your field is, right? Ask yourself, 100% of resources, how much percent are we putting in each bucket? How much of our time, talent, treasure are we spending managing problems, solving problems, and solving problems? And while I hope that some of you are really unique, and if you are, please visit me because I'd love to learn more about you. I will tell you, in most places, it ends up being about 60% manage, 39% solve, 1% dissolve, and that 1% is happy hour. All right. Number 3, form has to follow function. The structure of these things. Collaboration doesn't just happen. Right? You have to have kind of a structured element of things. And I'll move through this one a little bit quickly as well. Again, if we talk about an ecosystem approach, we acknowledge that these problems don't live at one particular sector. And we have to start working together. Following a collaborative process alone isn't enough. You need a way to structure things together. And so we look at first those who are managing problems, because you do need to manage problems. We do need people providing scaled interventions that work for students. That's absolutely what we need. And we have teams here, service teams, let's call them, that are providing that kind of direct, repetitive, service that is really critical. And then when a problem arises that needs a little bit of specialty, we go into our solving teams. And here is both a team that is responsible for solving individual issues, but maybe even a triage team. When something really goes wrong, these are a team of people that go out. They solve the case for one, solve for one. You need a team of people in the dissolve category. Right? You need a design team, is what we usually call them, but call them whatever the heck you want, it doesn't matter to me. And this is usually the thing that usually people don't have. There's an assumption that somewhere above in our hierarchy is actually doing this design work, but if you talk to most people who are on cabinets, right, cabinet work is pretty heavy in other ways. So ask yourself, do we have a design team, a team of people dedicated to taking all those micro stories that come out of when we're solving problems and say, how do we redesign the system? Most places lack that particular design team. And so this is a great first step as well. If you're interested in doing collaborative work, you want to focus on the systems, you need to get a team that's exclusively focused on this. We did this at South Texas College. They had a wonderful leadership academy. We said, great, you're the design team now. You're not allowed to spend any money, and you're not allowed to create the programs. Your only job is to go around, listen to what's going on campus, bring it back, and figure out how you can redesign the current system to dissolve that problem completely. It's been a wonderful pilot. We're starting to do more design teams or dissolution teams on campus everywhere. The key note here is that people who are managing and solving, they're working in the system. We need more folks that are working on the system itself. Folks that are responsible for that. That might be part of your other job, duties as assigned, and that 5% is going to grow maybe a little bit. That's all do. But think about it. Do you have a structure in place to bring this information to you? Here's one live example. We did this across the state of Indiana, where every region, multiple counties said, hey, we had to improve the talent system. And so we said at the top circle, who is responsible for developing talent? Who is responsible for attracting talent? And who is responsible for connecting that talent to jobs? And the middle is that design team there. They're the ones that are looking at the entire system and saying, how do we better improve all these parts and all these fits in there? There's thousands of ways to organize this, but the point is that you need to get some kind of way. Another example of this is up in Canada. David Brooks wrote this wonderful piece in the New York Times about how Canada is really tackling poverty. And he kind of says at the very bottom of this, I know the text is small, he says, let's talk about what this looks like in America. In one community you might have, a dozen or so food banks, and all of them have their heads down doing their own thing, very little connection. But in 2 years' time, Canada lifted 825,000 people out of poverty permanently. It's a 20% reduction in the national poverty rate. And I'll tell you that if I read that in today's New York Times about America, you know what I would think? I would think we'd change the way we calculate poverty. I wouldn't believe it. But Canada, that's not what they did. They actually lifted 20% of their population permanently out of poverty. Now, in that 2 years' time, it took them 15 years to get to those 2 years. Right? Through initiatives from Tamarack called Cities Reducing Poverty, they started with just 6 cities and eventually grew to 72 regions, 344 different towns. And David Brooks goes on to say, Canadians had to organize their communities differently. They realized that poverty was not going to be reduced by some cool new program no one thought of before. It was going to be addressed through better systems. And he goes on in the article to talk about what they did. And the very long story short, they spent the first year in the community just saying, what does poverty look like here? What does it uniquely look like in this community? And what are the unique assets we have to tackle poverty? And then they set their aspirations a little bit higher. It wasn't about having better poor people. Like, if you're in poverty but you're eating better, you're still in poverty. You're just maybe less hungry. Is that how do we eradicate poverty? How do we actually have vibrant communities where everyone can be prosperous in their own way? Is this kind of thinking, this one level up thinking, and that there was a dedicated team. 344 towns had a dedicated design team that said, we're going to underscore this. It wasn't one national solution that got pushed down. 344 different plans to reduce poverty, 72 regional plans to reduce poverty, all embracing what's uniquely there. My last point is this. I really want to encourage you all, if you have nowhere else to start here and raise your aspirations. And one level up thinking. This is something that we find pretty common across our network of places that have come together and they set their goals and aspirations much higher than their one organization. Eli Semernin, one of the architects that Mr. Miller knew, he always referred to this as the one level up thinking. When you design a thing, you have to design it by considering it in its next larger context. Sounds like doorknobs again. Before you design a doorknob, you kind of need to know what the door looks like, right? And so you have to design things for the next level up. And he goes even a step further here. If we want to know what should happen in the classroom, we kind of need to know what has to happen in the school, the district, the community. We do the same thing in our community colleges. We can do the same thing in our higher institutions. We can do the same kind of level up, one level up thinking for design. Where does design actually happen? And how are we informing that? And another way of thinking this is that we look down in a system for analysis. How is something working? If you want to know how your department is working, how well your course is performing, how well your students are doing in your course, you analyze that data, you look down. But if you understand why something's happening, or why your course is making greater impact, or why your department is making an impact in something greater, you have to look up in the system for understanding. We look up for purpose, we look down for function. And one of the best ways to get to this one level of thinking is by something that manufacturers learned in the 80s when they decided, American manufacturers decided not to listen to Edward Deming. A problem shows up usually not where it's formed. If we think about a car engine, you're at a quality assurance, there's a problem, right? That problem didn't happen there. It didn't happen at the station. That's where we found it. So we have to get in the habit of not looking with our eyes, but looking with our feet in social systems. The next time there's a problem that is confronted to you, whether it be a student or something else, I encourage you not to think about, yes, let's solve that problem, but then let's go up into the system, travel with our metaphorical feet, and find where that problem was created in the first place, and address the problem there. That is the act of dissolution. By addressing the problem where it actually floors, where it actually manifests. Successful places really focus on the process of working together. They work on systems, understanding how their system is currently behaving, rather than just examining the part of that particular system. But most importantly, they set their aspirations higher than themselves. And fundamentally, they embrace this notion that it's a systems thing, not a simple thing. Thank you very much.